Welcome back for another episode of Predictable Revenue Radio. The one show, maybe the only show designed to unlock sustained growth by showing you how to deliver predictable revenue. Yeah, we said predictable. By delivering insights, thought leadership, and the best practices on how to improve sales velocity. Hosted by Patrick Morrissey, Chief Marketing Officer at Altify, where he oversees all aspects of marketing as well as channels and alliances. And today he's going to be our guide for this show, so sit back, put your seatbelts on. It's going to be a fast ride with Patrick Morrissey. Hey, Patrick.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
Okay, I'm ready. I'm all strapped in. I got my notebook out, ready to start learning how to do predictable revenue. You can't really do predictable revenue. Come on.
Well, of course you can if you're an expert. And if you're not an expert, you want to either listen to the show and get some insight from the guests.
There you go.
It's all about focus.
It is. All right. Well, I'm ready. Let's focus.
This morning, we're going to talk a little bit about that intersection of sales and marketing and the handoff, and really what's the role of marketing as part of the revenue team. And the good news for everybody out there is that we've got somebody who has a global view on this particular problem, and also has a cross-industry and a for-profit and a non-profit market view of this. So we're joined this morning by Guy Weismantel, who's currently the Chief Marketing Officer at PushPay, and he's got some interesting insights to talk about the intersection between, sales and marketing, even down to the detailed level of, how do you turn a lead into an opportunity, into closed-won business and more revenue. So, Guy, good morning.
Hey, Pat, good to be with you today. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you and be on the podcast. This is awesome.
Well, we appreciate your time. Before we get into the details, Guy, give us a little bit of both your background and also give us some context about who is PushPay.
Absolutely, happy to. So, a little bit on me and for our listeners. Pat and I go back a bit. And my background started out in finance, and then I made a switch over into marketing and technology, and made my way to the Bay Area earlier. Last decade. We're getting old. And then eventually up the coast to Microsoft, where I spent a bunch of time. And then I've been in Seattle ever since. And about this time last year, got a call from a recruiter for this company called PushPay, which I had never heard of. But as I started talking to people in a really kind of different space, people in schools and churches and nonprofit organizations, I realized kind of what this company did. It's a mobile app and donor engagement platform. It was started by two friends in Auckland, New Zealand, about 7 years ago, who really saw an opportunity in this nonprofit space to kind of make it easier to be generous and give more money and get more goodness out there. And so they started this company, and it's kind of grown by leaps and bounds since then. So it's an interesting niche. And in my career, as you look at an opportunity, I'd never really thought about selling into nonprofits and a faith-based market. It was really different. But the good news is, it's a huge market. Literally hundreds of billions of dollars are given every year in the U.S. to our favorite charities, our churches, and to our schools. And so it's a fantastic opportunity, one that was ripe for disruption. And the great news, I think, Pat, you and I know this firsthand. Like, being marketers, we're always looking for great stories that we can tell. And I'd never had an opportunity as a marketer, and certainly to build a team and help grow a business, to tell stories that had such a direct impact on doing good in the world. So when you hear people that are able to get clean water to kids who don't have it in Africa, and build orphanages and feed people who need to be fed, all using your product, those are really great stories. And I thought, hey, this would be really interesting to have the opportunity to build a company like this. And that's why I'm here at PushPay. And we're up here in Seattle and growing by leaps and bounds. It's been a great ride so far.
Excellent. And actually, one of the things you're hitting on is you think about the idea of donor engagement, whether you're trying to do something good for your local school or community, or bring water to those who don't have it in Africa, all that stuff takes money. What's interesting about the background you just went through, because you've been at name brand public companies, the likes of Microsoft, Agencia, Marchex, et cetera. Give me a little bit of context for what's the same and what's different when you think about the world of nonprofit NGO and trying to help donor engagement versus help sell software or travel or big infrastructure.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm about 10 months in here, and I still am learning. Something will come up pretty frequently. I'm like, oh, I did not know that. That's interesting. And it can be humbling. You think you get kind of a couple of decades of technology marketing, and you really start to dial into an enterprise software buyer and a SaaS buyer, and you think you know them, and then you kind of flip over into this space, which, again, is a huge space. It's just not really at the leading edge of technology. And so you'll get about kind of to that 80% level where we're all consumers. We all have 1,000 apps on our phone. We all have Venmo or PayPal or want an easy way to eliminate friction from our digital lives. And so that part of the value proposition is fairly similar. There are buying committees. There are people who own budgets. And so from that standpoint, you can transfer your knowledge pretty easily. It really is that kind of last 20% that is really humbling to me, and that's where you really encounter people who don't have a profit motive. They may have investors and they may have people that they are accountable to. It's not a lack of accountability, but it's just not this kind of heavier ROI focus on what's the payback period and how fast can this generate revenue for me. The companies that we deal with, and in a lot of cases, made up largely of volunteers or part-time workers. And if you think about the organizations or the institutions that maybe you contribute to or volunteer your time at or are, invest in, a lot of those are made up by a core group of people that kind of made this their life's passion and their life's work and life's mission to do that. That's very different than the pitches that you and I get every day, Pat, from other vendors who are selling from marketer to marketer, and we kind of know why we're in this business and what we're trying to do. And so I think that's the part that's been really unique and interesting, is to know when to kind of let your foot off the throttle a little bit about as a marketer and really try to get into the shoes of what these people are trying to do. And if that is providing wells in Africa or is providing food for the shelter that's closed on the weekends, that's different. How we're going to help you achieve that comes a very different way than kind of just talking about payback time for a SaaS piece of software.
Absolutely. But it also, I probably, going back to the 80% use case for a second, you still got a business to run. You still got a quarter to make. You still have management, shareholders, investors, customers to really service. When you get to the day-to-day operations, whether you're in the space that you're in now with PushPay, or if you juxtapose that with the opposite end of the spectrum for purposes of discussion with friends at Microsoft, who clearly very clearly have a profit motive and need to be killing it these days. So, nice job. I think you left them in good shape, by the way. But the thing I'm curious about from your perspective is oftentimes there's friction and drive revenue between sales and marketing. Where does that friction happen, and what's your observation about, what's the same and what's different from when you and I started down this road?
And to be clear for your listeners, it's been one of the really challenging things is that you're selling into a nonprofit organization. We are a technology company and very clearly a for-profit company. We're actually publicly traded in Australia and New Zealand. And so we've got tons of shareholders and a board and investors and a quarterly number to hit. And so there's this weird kind of paradox between profit being a dirty word necessarily and taking money from people, and not really showing where that money's going on a donor management side. But from our standpoint, my job is very much still the same in terms of how do I provide a high-quality lead to my sales team. And as PushPay has grown leaps and bounds, one of the reasons the job was appealing to me was kind of how do you start to scale? Like when you're in this startup mode and you're in customer acquisition mode, and PushPay happened to be the first product in this space, really was around, hey, getting someone on the phone going, hey, no one has this. You could have this. Oh, great, I want this. Great, let's get you signed up and let's get you going. And now the market's flooded with competitors and less pricey alternatives and cheaper options. And so it becomes a much different type of tension between sales and marketing, whereas before the leads were having a super high conversion rate because there wasn't an alternative. Now there's 10. And so, the initial lead doesn't necessarily work anymore. So we spend a lot of time, just like I did at Microsoft, at thinking, how do we provide that quality lead at scale, at the velocity that our sales team needs to keep this growth rate up that the company has really become accustomed to.
Yeah, and that actually hits on a little bit of the art and the science, but also sort of the expectations on both sides of the aisle, because there continues to be this truism that if you guys in marketing would just figure out who's the customer and get me the Glengarry lead, I'd close all day long. So the only thing standing between us and global domination is you and marketing getting it together and getting me a better lead. How do you think about that?
Hear that a lot still. The one thing I think that is a little bit different about this space, which again I learn a lot every day, is that we don't have the traditional kind of database to kind of go after, because we do have so many people that are volunteering their time. Like a lot of our database is a lot of Gmail, a lot of Yahoo accounts, because these are people that they do their day job. They might be a marketer or an IT pro, but they're lending their time to these institutions. And so for us, that kind of ideal lead sometimes doesn't necessarily exist, because for one nonprofit company, they will have a board or they will have a list of people that are helping, but you could go into another institution like a church and they'll have a really small staff, but actually there's these people that have this committee off to the side and they're the ones that are actually making the recommendation to the pastor on what technology to buy. So what we've found in this space, and I think it's just an interesting challenge, the more you have fewer of those ideal leads that pop up, we as marketers have more work to do to try to mine data and get closer to the customer and find that seam that our competitors haven't yet to say, aha, this is actually someone who's interesting and is exerting more influence, and what are we doing to reach them? We go through that a lot. It's just with sometimes less conventional type of titles because, again, it's just some person who's downloaded a piece of content you have as a Gmail account. Now, sales doesn't want to talk to a Gmail account. They want the actual formal email of the institution or the group. But in our case, that Gmail account might be that guy who is the gatekeeper who's making the recommendation to the board, of the nonprofit. And so that's really important for us to kind of mine through and get that in front of sales. And as we become more data driven and we've spent a lot of time this first year of me being here to start to instrument the business, we're now able to kind of give some insights into sales, whereas before they were running maybe up against the wall because they couldn't find who this person was because they didn't exist in one of the many databases that you can import to try to fill out your account profile.
And has that changed the way you think about the marketing funnel and the intersection here? Because there's multiple things that you're touching on there. One of them is trying to understand, are we talking to the right person? And then there's also the handoff and how do you get the marketing team aligned to say, hey, this is good, and we've got some data that supports that we think this is good, even if it happens to map back to a Yahoo address, with the expectation on the sales side in terms of the definition and really trying to focus on qualifying the opportunity.
Yeah, I think one interesting phenomenon I've noticed here and talking to friends as they kind of go through this transition with companies that start to scale is that once you start seeing some sort of degradation in terms of just lead quality and not a conversion rate that starts to slow because, again, you either have a changing buyer persona or a more sophisticated buying group or whatever it is, or more competition, so they're taking longer and doing the research. The marketing, what I've noticed, and certainly it's been true with the team here that we're building and have, is that we're kind of ahead of that curve because we can kind of see, hey, this person, we can kind of just do some reverse IP and go, okay, this person's actually at this group, but they've got this email, and that's not on our radar screen. And so marketing tends to be a little bit ahead of sales in that fact. Sales, will tell you, no, I don't want a volunteer passed over because they're not a buyer or they're not a decision maker. And it's been up to us to kind of use data and use some of these insights and use attribution, right, to say, well, look, they're hitting this over and over. Here's an insight we've got. Let's go visit some customers. You can look at data all day, but let's go talk to these people and understand, oh, yeah, they do have a small staff. They do rely on volunteers, or they do rely on third parties to kind of do some of this research for them. And let's bring that in. And now you've created a different customer profile that sales can both have a better conversation, which I know is super important to Altify to be able to support, but it's also one that, again, helps you convert faster and show marketing value faster. And that's good for our side of the fence as well.
Absolutely. So hold that thought. We're going to take a break and pay the bills here. And I want to come back and get to the scorecard about how you think about measuring it and how you conduct those conversations internally. So we'll be right back.
You're only as successful as your customers, and that demands the need for an exceptional sales execution, revenue retention, and customer success. The challenge for most sales leaders and their teams, however, is that their sales process just doesn't match how their customers buy. Sustained growth isn't possible because the revenue team isn't aligned with customers and prospects. With Altify's sales transformation solutions, companies can deliver predictable revenue growth. Yes, we said predictable revenue growth. They can also acquire and retain customers, and they can collaborate across the revenue team to qualify and win new business while delivering value that unlocks cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Built natively on the Salesforce platform, Altify helps salespeople, managers, and executives achieve sustained revenue growth. They help accelerate sales performance for Autodesk, Comcast, GE, Honeywell, Salesforce, Tableau, and United Healthcare. They can do the same for you. Visit Altify.com, just like it sounds, Altify, Altify.com. All right, back to Patrick and his guest. Can I ask just one quick question as I listen to you guys talk this morning?
Absolutely.
Here? Is it any tougher? He's selling to a base of nonprofits. I would think that's not a predictable revenue place because they don't know what their revenue is. It goes way up in the holidays, and then they struggle the rest of the year. Is that a challenge, more of a challenge, or is it all the same?
It is just a different challenge. It's not more of a challenge. We, Pat's used to selling into customers that have a lot of seasonality. At Microsoft, we had these things called moments in time, and it was around graduation and Mother's Day and back to school and Christmas. And you really kind of organized a lot of your effort around these key moments in time where you could capture the attention of your prospect. And so even at Microsoft, their different businesses have those as well. And then for nonprofits, the holidays are obviously a big one. If you're a church, it's Christmas and Easter are your two big moments in time where you've got a lot of folks that are going to be in the building. And so, part of our challenge is just adapting to the different rhythms. Every nonprofit's going to have a fundraising drive. They're going to do Giving Tuesday. They're going to do some of these things. And so while it's not as maybe uniform, it does exist, and you can kind of see the spikes. And so it just is it's a matter of kind of getting used to a little bit different rhythm than you do on kind of more of the commercial side, I think.
Okay. Just had to ask, right?
Yeah, that's very interesting. We're speaking today with Guy Weismantel, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at PushPay. And one of the things, just building on that thought for a second and Paul's question, Guy, is you made the distinction or called out specifically that, the PushPay solution is mobile. And that really gets to the heart of, what channels are driving the revenue. But it sounds like in your space, as all of us are mobile and network and connected, that, if I'm going to wager a guess here, I'm going to say that whether I'm in a church or a school situation, it's not passing the plate anymore. It's making a donation on the mobile app.
Well, that's how we'd love it to be. And ideally, and more it is, but I don't know if you'd be surprised or not, and maybe those folks listening who are a part of, participate in some of these institutions can attest to, how manual and offline a lot of these organizations are. And part of it is they're not as tech forward and not as tech savvy, and they don't have as big a budgets in some cases. But in other places, if you're a huge nonprofit or a huge school or church, mobile giving is very much a part of how you think about increasing giving over time. I mean, there's tons of data that you have around, that we have, and that shows, that people who give on mobile give more because, again, we're eliminating friction. We're not passing the plate. The other thing, too, in terms of going back to the question on predictability, which is kind of interesting, is you can kind of see, one of the things for like a church, for instance, or nonprofit is, if I'm not involved or I'm not at church on Sunday, I can still give any time. And so, these institutions are getting a lot more savvy around pushing out notifications and getting people involved with the kind of the causes that they care about. And then if I hear that, hey, we're trying to raise money to send a group down to, Guatemala to help, people out, great. I'll give $20. I don't have to wait till Sunday to do that. Or we had a nonprofit whose boiler and furnace kind of both went up on the same week. They both, just kind of went out, and they put out a call through the app, and within a few hours they'd raised enough money to kind of get both of those pieces of equipment for their community center back up and going. And so it really is around kind of understanding when you have that moment to be generous, and increasingly in digital, we want that to be any time. We always see the announcement when there's a hurricane or an earthquake for the Red Cross, which is a great example. They try to make it super easy to you just text the number, you automatic $10 donation, and that's easy to do. We feel good about doing that, and it costs us no time. And that's what we're trying to kind of replicate at scale for thousands of different institutions that have, great causes that they want to be supporting as well. So it's a super interesting problem to help these organizations solve.
That is an interesting problem, and it is an interesting problem with real scale because everybody's got, big and small, and the boiler example going out is a great one. Here's a thought for you to respond to. My thesis would be kind of going back to what's the role of marketing as part of building a revenue generating machine. Is there's not necessarily sales and marketing. What there really is a joint revenue team. I guess the first question is, how do you think about that? And the second question is, when you get to the boardroom or the management meeting, what are the metrics that are most important to be reporting that really demonstrate your contribution there?
So I love that you bring this up because I think more and more, and you and I both probably listen to a bunch of really great podcasts and have lots of friends who are thinking about this. And it's probably a little bit less on, where do the SDRs sit in sales or marketing and, who owns what exactly. But increasingly, when I go into our board meetings, I go in with our, chief revenue officer, and we're sitting together and reporting. And given that with attribution now, marketing's involved in some form or fashion on literally every sale that we're making. There's very few exceptions at this point in time where you can't see that someone is doing something on your website or downloading a piece of content or seeing you at an event, whatever it is. Even if it's sales generated, they're going to be working with marketing. So this kind of false attribution of, oh, that was a marketing lead, or, oh, that was a sales lead, like that's not even how, we should be thinking anymore. And again, regardless of where the team sits, it is very much a joint model. And so it's less around like, where'd the lead come from, and more so on, what happened to that lead? What was the quality of that lead? Did it convert faster by doing these things and trying to find those insights and then driving that revenue together faster? And part of that is, sales training and making sure that they've got the right insights, so that we're not giving them too much information so they get paralyzed, but we're also giving enough so they can have a qualified conversation. Our sales cycles are kind of, 30 to 90 days. They're pretty quick. So, we've got to have velocity through our pipeline, but also arm the SDR and the AEs to have the right type of information and insight versus the competition or with the business problem so that they can help get that deal closed. And increasingly, that's not just sales or marketing. Like sales enablement is we're the prime contributor to the sales enablement team and to the SDR team, and everyone really kind of sits together now. And I think that's a great move where it was just even a couple of years ago where there was this kind of artificial kind of wall between the two teams.
Yeah, I violently agree with you there. And when you think about the marketing existing to helping sales sell, and the point that you raised about you're being a key contributor to or driver to success for things like sales enablement and so on, are there things that you think that you would call out in your experience that work particularly well in trying to either decode the buying signal, if you think about this from a campaign element perspective, or what are the two or three gotta haves that really help sales enablement let salespeople be more effective, or help salespeople be more effective and help them accelerate in that velocity equation?
Yeah, I think, this will be unique to every company, but I think it really is finding what it is that we solve better than anyone else, right? And I think that's the first lens, because we all talk to buyers who are going to price shop and price compare and just have a race to the bottom from a commoditization standpoint. And those aren't the ones that are probably going to, do best and stay on our product, and they tend to churn if they do buy us. And then they're not going to, they're not really in it for the same reason that from a value perspective you can provide. So for us, it's really making sure that as our SDRs are kind of going through this qualification process, we can kind of, muddle through and understand what the organization is trying to solve. And if it is, hey, we've seen a decrease in giving, or we're stagnant, or we think we can increase because we want to do these, these other amazing things, then that's a discussion. Marketing should be priming sales to be able to have them and have the proof points and have the examples and everything so that they can kind of have that in an accelerated fashion. And so for us, it kind of goes back to basics. Like we got a little bit stale on some of our persona work, and it was, all right, let's get back out in the field. Let's sit next to these folks and really understand what is the problem they're trying to solve today and right now, and how do we kind of fine tune some of the scripts that our SDRs are saying, or the content that we can provide that matches up to the problem they have today, and then that provides just a better conversation and an acceleration of the deal cycle.
100%. And I would, again, reinforce your notion of what the unique business value and what's the thing that we solve better than anybody else. And I'm conscious of the fact that you've got to get back in the field and go solve that problem. So as we're wrapping up here, when you think about your career, Guy, and look at the best sales leader you've ever worked for or worked with, who would you call out as that person, and what did you learn from him?
There's a great leader that he's actually a marketing leader, but our buddy Dave Kellogg, I think, was a guy who we worked for and I worked for several years ago. But I think a lot of what Dave taught, because Dave was early on in kind of making sure that marketing was plugged into sales. And so I think he's worn both hats in his careers as well. And I think he would actually put us on a grid. I don't know if you remember this. And he'd kind of like have the sales team evaluate the effectiveness of marketing on a regular basis. And if it was, hey, I would love to have this person accompany me on a sales call, or no, keep them away from me, they're doing me harm. It was a pretty cut and dried evaluation back then to kind of say, how is marketing providing value? And so I think I look at that, not in terms of I don't do grids for my people anymore, but I do think of, if we're not helping sales accelerate, then we're just a cost center, and that's easy to be cut. And like I said, we've got a board, we've got a number to hit every quarter, we've got stockholders, and that's the first place we're going to go if we can't show it. And so I think some of the folks that I've had to work for at Microsoft and going back to Business Objects days, to really kind of show the number one job of marketing is to make sales easier. And that's the lens that everything we do has to go through. And if we're doing that, then it's a good day for me and for the marketing team.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no better validation as a marketer than being out and participating in some closed-won business and having your partner in sales say, couldn't have done it without you.
100%. Yep, absolutely.
Yes, we both went through that same school, and I think that's exactly where we need to get to. And your point's well taken as we wrap up here that, marketing is all about driving sales velocity and being seen as part of the revenue team. So, Guy Weismantel, thank you very much for the time and for dropping the insight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Pat. All the best to you and to Anthony and to the team at Altify. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Have a great day.
You've been listening to Predictable Revenue, the one show that tries to help you, just do that. Predict revenue growth. Right here in the Funnel Radio channel for at-work listeners like you.